Okay, all, this is a process video to talk about creating a section perspective in Rhino. It's going to build on a couple tools we had in winter quarter videos that will be linked in this YouTube description and sort of like chapters. But so you understand, I'm borrowing a student Christian's model that's pretty well fleshed out. Just to show you in plan here. It's got this kind of like inserted two figures that are mirrored on each other. Talking about this central sort of focal point. You can see it's a pretty dense mesh of kind of like a 1x2, 2x2 members, forming a real dense field, and then kind of these Boolean cutouts across the way, kind of in a 50-50. So when I go into perspective view, I'll just make this larger, you'll be able to see here as I rotate around the model a shot of what is the Giuseppe's facade that he's working on, and Finney's for the site that's downtown right off Monterey. But the key thing just to understand is this is just kind of workflow of a section perspective methodology for this particular slot project. So if I come over here, I want to first create an understanding of perspective through clipping plane. So we know that this project in the sort of right-hand view, Christian was talking about in this project, he actually wants to look at the facades of Finney's. He wants to look at the facade of Finney's. That's where his sort of meter comes from. So I'm going to first create a clipping plane, like I'm going to cut a section. So I'll be in the right-hand view, and I'm cutting along in here, and you can see that the clipping plane is already active in this perspectival view. So I'm going to come over here, grab the clipping plane and pull it out. And what I want to look at is I want to study where I'm getting a cut that, as you see in top view, is probably just past the dominant figure here. So I see a lot of like floating members here, and then just into it on this side. So I see the two different types of condition. And then of course I cut through this archway at the end, and then this kind of piece tucked into the alley. And as you see here, as I rotate around in perspective, I've got a view that shows a bench sort of seat condition, this kind of platform rising comes up. That's going to be a sort of stage or sort of gathering condition, one of the programs our studio is playing with, and then a sort of more private tucked in area to the rear of the site. So with this figure, I can now borrow, again, a lot of the terms from winter, where I'm going to go to set camera in this perspective view. I'm going to hit this caret, so I arrow down, and I'm going to do set camera, and I'm going to show camera, and this is going to show that view in all other views that I have active. So as I zoom out here, this is what that view is looking at. Here is my camera location. There is the target location. This can act as the sort of dolly on. And so I'm going to first start to approximate a view that's going to be, for this purposes, we're actually going to look at the center of the stage as the kind of lock-in. And so you can see here, if I come back to perspective, I want to be kind of that center of the stage. And then as I start to understand a little bit more about this project, I also want to start to set my heights, right? So as I look at this height set, right, I can be setting up a particular view. And then as I'm in here, so here's my Z location, I'm 28 feet in the air, so I want to come to 5 feet and 5 feet. And now I'm looking almost straight on, but I can now verify, because of the way this works in plan, I want my camera and my target to share the same y-axis location. So I'm just going to split the dimness right now and call this 27 and this 27. And now I know I'm looking dead straight. I'm looking perpendicular left-hand side, and I can start walking my camera up and back. But also, we understand from the winter quarter is the idea of perspective and field of view. This is actually a very nice field of view, this focal length, to model with, but we might want to play with a more dynamic lens. So I'm actually going to bring this out to something like 10 millimeters, which is a very wide angle lens and very distorted on the edges, but can create a lot of drama. So as I come and walk in, as you see, I still have quite a bit of the building set up. And now if I go to the spot, you can understand through this image, and I'll make it larger, and I can hide my clipping plane, I can see a lot of information in this piece, in this pretty dense sort of rhythm. And what I can now choose to do is I can export this image, again assuming I'm dead center. And I say dead center meaning on the stage. If I zoom in here, it looks like I'm pretty close, but not quite there. I'm going to pull this right to that spot, and now I'm looking dead center of this stage, and that sets up a really interesting sort of focal point, right, of this image. As you can imagine, as I move the dolly down, I privilege maybe this bench and niche, or I can come down to the more private space in this frame view of the sky down here at the edge of the alley. But for this purpose, I'm just going to pick a central point on this kind of, again, stage/informal gathering area. And I can use, through the magic of, again, what we played with last quarter, I can select everything in this frame here, and I can type in make 2D. And I'm going to maintain source layers. I don't need all of this information because a lot of it is going to have, like, hidden lines are going to be very busy and confusing. I do want the view, but you guys know you can select and toggle on, so I can actually pick clipping plane intersections, which is a great way to sort of think about those cut lines, right? What would actually be cut in the image. And I don't need the scene silhouette. Like I said, the hidden lines I think will be too busy, nor tangent edges. Viewport rectangle, I recommend actually cropping later for anything you want to do. So I would just, with this, I'm going to call this Make 2D Section Perspective. And I click Apply. And you can see I'm working on a MacBook Pro from a few years ago. PC similar, all these commands are very similar on the PC side of Rhino. It's currently thinking through, and I now come to my top view, just like we do with any other Make 2D. And I now have a section perspective. And I'm just going to bring this up here to show you what we're sort of beginning to touch the surface on, right? Is that I now have some of this line work, some of this information, some of it is accurate, right? You begin to see pieces, but just like anything with Make 2D, I'm seeing a hollow inside of the beam, then I'm seeing a piece, so I'm going to have to come in and do some cleanup, and maybe pick, like, again, this is actually the cut element, and that curve I can copy around and be the cut plane. But if I come to my Layers tool, I've got my Make 2D visible, I've got my curves, my site, and so I can start to use these layers to begin to manage various things that are going on, right? So clipping plane intersections, right? So if I wanted to use that sort of condition, right? But unfortunately, it didn't give me a ton of information here. So we'll look at a second option for this as well. But where we're going is, this is just an image I loaded in from Louis Dermaki Lewis's manual section book. Again, highly recommend this document, or this physical book. Incredible drawings, and you can see where they're using section perspective to give you a lot of information about the spaces. This large open space here, that's kind of plinth sits on the ground floor, sort of stepping up from the sort of public way here, and then this apparently floating sort of bridged element, right, that sits here. Incredible amount of information from the cut beyond. And so we're doing a version of this as like a setup, and that's a way to use a section perspective. And again, this was a 10mm lens, so when I come back, I want to make sure, of course, to come back here, and you should always kind of play with your sort of name views and save out, right, in that sort of sense. So we can come here and begin to save a view, but also, just so you can understand this, right, as I come out here, you can see how distorted the image is, right? So I want to make sure to come back to my properties and change this back to 50 whenever I go back to model, right? So that's the beauty of the name view, would allow me to come back, okay? But I also, I'm going to show this clipping plane again. And for the purpose of this exercise, I'm not even going to bother keeping it, because instead what I want to show is one other option here, and this is where I highly recommend making sure that you're playing with copies or a saved as, is I'm going to take this figure, I'm going to copy it up here, and I'll copy it up a decent amount of space, 500 feet up here. Oh, sorry, that's it. Actually hit enter. Copy this up 500 feet. And now I can hide this, not needed. Come back to perspective. And now I'm looking here. And what I want to do is I'm going to now create a figure that I can Boolean subtract from. And so I'm going to pick the center of this here. I'm going to extrude, or I should say Boolean or trim. Extrude this curve. Let's go both sides, so I'm just trying to make something here. And I now have this figure, which I can move up and down the alley. And now I'm going to go back and see, like we talked about, I want to look at, oh, that's my curve. I want to look at Finney's, which is the left-hand side of this view. So as I come here, I also want to make sure to be cutting through the sort of elements that are thinner here and then thicker here. So I'm going to move this figure over just a little bit, so I'm not quite symmetrical, so I can start to see a little difference in the logic here. And then what I can do is I can select and do a Boolean difference. And so select the objects that I want to subtract from. Okay, I'm going to select everything here. That's fine. So I'm going to hit Enter, and then select the object I want to subtract with. And I'm going to hit Done, and delete my cutting object. Sure, that's fine. Delete the input. Sure, that's fine, because I've made my copies. And I now have, ooh, aside from a ghosted window set, that's funny, which I can easily clean up because I don't know, again, I don't need Giuseppe's. These are already attached. I now have the same thing, but now it's truly been cut. And so depending on what we're trying to accomplish here, I can come back and play with the same. Had I saved a name view, have that, but now we can come back here, back into perspective. I'm going to set this to 5 feet again. And now I can do my same scenario of walking to that center point. I know that I also want my Y locations to be the same, so I'm going to pick 528 and 528. And I'm now looking straight perpendicular on the Y-axis there. And then if I pull closer, I can now come back here, and I know I want to change my lens to 10 millimeters. And now I can walk up to make sure I'm getting Finney's and all of Finney's. And I can zoom in here and make sure I'm centered on that stage. And that's enough info where I've got the entry to Finney's, the back of the alley, and I can now select this and do the same thing, make 2D, grouping the output, maintaining source layers, and I can run this, and I'll call this section perspective 2, and this is going to run and make 2D. And now that I'm not playing with geometry that's sort of been virtually cut, I actually have cut it away. It's not like hidden via a clipping plane, I should say. I now will have another type of perspective to play with. Again, these need to be scaled differently depending on what you're after, right? It's a designer, but you can then come in here and look at, and as you can see, I actually have a little more info. It's a little more organized. The stage is a little bit more cut and clean, right? Everything just feels like I've got a little more control. Still not perfect, a lot of mess in these little nests here that would be cleaned up based on the logic. But if I come back to then this one, no different scale in the virtual space. But you can see where I'm, again, got my this here and a little bit different edges, and again, a little bit different edges in that way. So there's not a right or a wrong, but the one actually does need a copy. Again, when you're Boolean subtracting, one is copying and making sure, because I now can go back and show, or I've hidden out another layer, but I've got this preserved 3D model that has all my other info. This was my stage set that I copied over to mess with here. So again, these tools basically went from setting up a clipping plane that was running as forming a longitudinal section, but then in perspective things, and then lenses manipulated was where I went as wide as 10 millimeters from the 50 millimeter default lens that you start with, and then I locked my Y location, look them down, I locked my Z and down, and then I was able to dolly in and around to get the information that would be the relevant from front of alley, left-hand side of page, to back of alley, right-hand side of page. And you can see again the way Christian has sort of set this up around. Finney's has a couple downstairs windows that he was respecting with his sort of niches, and that's how he sort of metered the project. So that could be an interesting design discussion. And this can be populated with Entourage. It can be collaged and transferred via Mod Podge and gel medium transfer with the line work. But what you have now is something that can be cleaned up, just like Winter Quarter, but the section perspective, even though we never will experience this building as individually this way, as a design tool, can be really, really powerful as a storytelling device with a little bit of depth. And again, the distortion, if it's intentional, can be a really thoughtful presentation tool. And that's why, again, I just zoom out to end with where I pointed out the way this drama unfolds in this kind of drawing with the populated people and scale and city life and things that are happening front to back in open porous space from the plinth level down to the lower level of the boulevard. Okay, and yeah, this will also link in the notes to previous Make 2D and perspective workflows that we learned about in the Winter Quarter. Thanks.